I quit college to open a studio. I told my parents that I was going to college to work in broadcasting. I had a degree. I had a, technical, whatever they teach you in technical school. And I built a studio and I started recording people like Jose for free. That's why I couldn't make any money at it. But he introduced me to Nuno. We recorded the first Sinful was the name of the band, the first demo there. That is actually where I got my start. And I recorded Nuno and Sinful, of course. And then he went right from Sinful to Extreme. Oops, there's my cat.
Oh, hello.
Hello, kitty cat. I love that.
We've got a great cameo appearance from the studio.
Tune into the YouTube, guys, so you can see Bob's awesome board, his 3 Grammys, and his cat.
And his cat's butt right in the screen there.
Yeah, it's going to be in my face in about a second.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 2020. I'm Siobhán here, as always, with Ben and Cory. And this week, we are really excited to have another audio-focused interview with Bob St. John, legendary producer, engineer, mixer, worked with Extreme, with Nuno. So many stories in this episode.
Yeah, definitely another fountain of knowledge, which we've been super lucky to have these past few episodes here. And we really get into his relationship with Nuno and Extreme in this one.
Yeah, if you haven't listened to the Extreme episodes with Nuno, they're really good backstory. So you come in and hear Bob's version of things because, well, he's awesome and you should just listen to him. Part 1 with Bob St. John. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Benny Goodman. I am here with my cohorts, my compatriots, my other insert a C word that sounds intelligent here. Cory Peza and Siobhán Cronin. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Great.
Excited to be here.
Yeah.
I'm exceptionally excited because not only have Cory and I been nerding out on the fact we've had these great engineers on, but the gentleman that has graced us with his presence today has literally been a part of some of the biggest records of my childhood that sculpted my mind when I actually cared about music and things and life in general. He's worked with Extreme. He's worked with Collective Soul, Duran Duran, a bunch of Latin music, which he won 2 Grammys for. And he's just an incredible engineer and producer. And so far seems like a very nice guy. Bob St. John.
Nice to be here.
Yes, thank you for being here with us.
My
I think
pleasure.
I see 3 Grammys in the background.
Yeah, I know. I'm checking out the video here to see what's going on.
Benny's he's being marked down 1 point for that.
Oh man, I actually said I only saw 2 on the giant discography of all your awards, so I apologize.
Maybe
there
it's
are
not up to
clearly
date.
3.
It's 2 American Grammys and 1 Latin Grammy.
Amazing.
Yes. There is, I'm very proud of those and very proud of the bands I've worked with here. For sure.
That's incredible. Well, while we're on it, let's maybe introduce you to the audience. And for people that may not know what you do, can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from, how you got involved in music, and kind of how you got into the world of engineering, producing?
Originally, I'm from Milford, Massachusetts. I've lived in Miami here for 25 plus years. But
I'm a Miami person too.
Yeah. And hello. And so the only thing I ever really wanted to do with my life was record music. I come from a family of musicians. Very few people know that I actually can play. I stopped playing keyboards back when I decided I want to be a recording engineer. And I play more now than I have in the past couple of years, just because it's become so much easier with computers and so much easier than chasing somebody down to get something done when I have an idea for a part. But, the thing is, the only thing I really wanted to do was record music. That was it. And at that time, I had no idea how I was going to do that. I was basically a very introverted, shy kind of kid. And, I wasn't going to walk into a studio and say, hey, give me a job, even though looking back on it now, it would have been that easy. Because, you can find anybody who can empty the trash and just get near the equipment. So what I did was I had a shop teacher tell me, I was in electronics, because I have a background in electronics too. Shop teachers said, Robert, you can't record music. You make no money doing that. You can make money fixing TV set. So it is Russian. The only accent I do, it sounds like a Cuban who's from Transylvania.
No, it was a great impression.
I don't mean to interject,
though.
Okay. I don't mean to interject, but he wasn't wrong.
He wasn't wrong, but I mean, where would I be if I was fixing TV sets now? We throw them out.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Continue on in your perseverance story. I apologize.
So, I'm like, oh, wow. I still had that dream in my head, and I was very involved with music. I mean, my daughter, who's like 23 now, she's very involved with music too. It's just part of who we are. I come from a family of musicians. And while I didn't know if I wanted to play music, you could see I was going towards these two things. So in order to be near music and technology and knobs and that sort of stuff, I thought, well, I could work in radio. I could be an announcer. I mean, I've always been completely enamored with the sound of my own voice, so I was all set for that. I started working at the radio station, but in the back of my mind was this thing that was itching at me. I really want to be a recording engineer, and how am I going to do that? I'm going to try and condense this story as best as I can. When I was in high school, I sat next to this kid in American government. His name was Jose Enes, and Jose was this kid he was from Canada. He was Portuguese. I was a good boy. I didn't listen to rock music or anything. And when I had set up a pirate radio station in my bedroom, I built a transmitter. I did all this stuff. I built my own console because
Wow.
I had no money, but I had some know-how on how to do this stuff. This guy was into music. He was like a long-haired pot-smoking freak to me. And I was always the good boy. And that ship has sailed. I was always the good boy. And I listened to him and his friend, Adam Ferrecchia, two good friends talking. And he sat next to me in American government. Adam was in front. We were in the back of the room. And he would show up almost always 5 minutes late for class. He'd come in class. He'd put his head down the desk, put the coat over his head. And I'm thinking, it's got me seated next to this delinquent. And these guys were always talking about music. And from the way they talked about music, I could tell that this kid was in a band. I didn't know that, but I'm like, a band, music. I could record music. So I, very sheepishly, because I was shy, I very sheepishly joined in on the conversation. Adam was that kid who he had all the albums and everything else. And I became friends with him. And I said to Jose, I stuck myself way out on a limb. And I said, I've got some recording equipment. He's like, you can record my band, huh? And I said, yeah, I can record your band. I had no idea how to record a band. So, but I had two microphones. I had a mixer that I had made in a cigar box because I didn't know how to do any sort of like metal work. And I built it all out of Radio Shack parts with a microphone preamps in it. And I had a little 4-channel battery operated realistic mic preamp. I don't know how I got this stuff, but I had it. And I had some equipment I borrowed from a friend. So he said, well, why don't you come down and record my band? I'm like, yeah, okay. So I put all the things I had, all the wires and microphones. I had like 4 or 5 microphones. I had barely enough to do the stuff. And they rehearsed at this place downtown in Milford. It was in an old building. I mean, when I walked in there, I can only describe it as a den of inequity. It was just a bunch of teenage kids drinking beer, smoking pot. You could hear somebody jamming Zeppelin down the hall and another band. And this guy had sublet this place out. It was pretty darn disgusting, like something you would see in a movie set for like disgusting band hangout. And I'm looking for Jose. I'm like, where is this guy? Where is he? Because I walked right by him because he was making out with some girl up against a mattress that was pushed up against the wall.
This is so metal.
Hey, he says,
this is so heavy metal right now.
When you see where the story goes, it'll make a great monster. He's Saint, because people who've known me since I had hair, that's a long time ago, call me Saint. Every now and then you'll see Nuno will call me Saint, and he's trying to be a smartass. And I said, yeah, I'm set up. So I set up and I did it, and I was just hooked. I still have that recording. I have nearly everything I've done in 40 years. I still have the recording. Well, what happens is Jose and I became very good friends, and he was my guinea pig for recording. That's what I did. And I had a 1/4-inch open reel and a cassette with DBX, and I kept bouncing between them. This is how I learned how to make basic balances and all this stuff. Remember, you guys are lucky. You got computers and Pro Tools. All I had was my imagination and like a 4-channel mixer I made, and as long as I had batteries, I was happy.
That's adorable. I love the fact that you said that, because I actually am from a time where I actually did use a 4-track recorder, but it was 6 tracks because we split 2 of the tracks, and I realized that Dolby C noise reduction actually stole some of the high end, so I tended to go Dolby B, and I bought all the chromium dioxide tapes. Right. So I was alive for that before the computer. So I also sit on that ivory tower.
You're on my
revel
camera.
in.
You look like you're about 28, so I'm taking a guess.
I turned 40
You
next
just made
month.
Ben's
But thank
day.
you.
Okay.
While we're on this, before you go on, I want to ask, because you said you always wanted to be an engineer or do recordings. How did you know that? Like, what was your initial spark of inspiration for that? Because that seems very specific. Most kids, they see an instrument. Like, how did you have that passion so early?
I was like 4, 5, 6 years old. I would grab all of my mother's 45s. She says I ruined her whole collection, which I probably did. I would stare at the labels. I would put them on the turntable. I stuck a needle in a foam cup and made it play. I was just fascinated with everything to do with it. And by the time I was like 6 or 7, I started taking apart anything electronic. It made them crazy. I wanted to see how it works. I would buy stuff at flea markets and fix them so I could record stuff. And at first I had nothing to record. I would record sounds outside, record fire trucks going by, and I just listened to it and figure out how I was going to make it better. It was, my intentions were very pure, to say the least, you know. And then doing that, then I loved music. So I would buy albums and 45s. My mother gave me $1 a week, and I would go and buy a 45. I still have those too.
What was the first 45 you bought?
Are you ready for this? I'm not kidding. I had a little battery-operated Parrot turntable, and you know, because I was so private, I had a little earphone, and I went down to Music Store, and the first song I bought was Zager and Evans in the year 2525. Don't ask me why. You dig that up and see what it is. I don't know why, but that's the first single I bought. I remember had a big bright orange.
If
RCA.
it was "Don't Ask Me Why" by Billy Joel, I would have liked that better.
that would be another like 15 years later, 10 years later.
Well, I was going to say you look very good.
No, thank you. I'll be 60 in 2 weeks. So, thank you. So that, you know, having that interest always is what got me there. And I loved music and I loved sound, and I wanted to be able to put these things together. And I started reading hi-fi magazines, and I started hanging around musicians. And then that's when I realized this is something I can actually do. I didn't know there would be a future in it. I didn't know who did it. If I could do it all over again, I'd just go assist at a studio in a music center like New York or LA or Nashville or something, which would be an easier path for anybody. You know, if you're driven and you're determined and you really want to do it, you can do it. It's just a matter of sitting down and putting your mind to it. And you know, as I've done seminars and I've spoken to many young people, and I have said many times, be prepared to not have a card and not have a phone, to have your electricity shut off, because this life consumes you and you don't make a lot of money. I've been very fortunate, but I started working with Jose in 1979, 80. I don't think I started making money doing this as a recording engineer until like 85 or so. And, you know, I'll continue the story because I got off track. I'll just keep going. So Jose and I would record in his basement all the time. He was my experiment, and he would be in one band after another. And he tells me one day, he says, you know, he's putting together a new band. You know, he says, you know, because he's Portuguese, and especially between being Portuguese and Canadian, and, you know, because I work with so many different Mediterranean cultures, you know, between Portuguese, Venezuelans, and Argentinians, they're pretty sure they were put on this earth as a gift from God. So you have to contend with that. And then being from Canada was just like everything from Canada was automatically better. So Jose came to my house and he looked at my record collection. And he's like, "This is cool. What, you got a radio station here?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "You got to put me on the air." And he says, so he starts looking at my record collection, which was pop music of the 70s. Carly Simon, Donna Summer, Bee Gees, Barry Manilow. And he said, "Oh, wow. You don't have any music here." He says, "Listen, this is cool music." And he was a fan of music. He said, "This is cool music, but you got to get some music." He says, "We're going to Strawberries." Then was the record store up north. And Adam came with us.
Love Strawberries.
R.I.P. Yes. So there I was in Strawberries with Adam and Jose. And Jose said, "We're going to pick out the records. You don't have a choice." And Adam was a music freak, and so was Jose. I mean, you know, he's like a music encyclopedia. And, you know, so they go, and I will tell you the records that they picked out for me. And remember, I worked all week to make this money so I could go buy. Remember, records used to be $6.98. Remember that? So, and we walk out to the checkout. Here are my first rock and roll purchases. I got Zeppelin 1. I got Van Halen 1. Black Sabbath, Paranoid. The Clash, London Calling. Cheap Trick. Live at Budokan. and I think Rush 2112.
So
It's a
what we
solid
learned from
lineup.
this, what we learned from this,
Iconic.
Bob, is trust your friends.
Absolutely.
Because they are your friends. Because if
I'm
you're
friends
listening
with
to
those guys to this day.
Carly
So-
Simon and Barry Manilow, like, listen, it's smooth. I get it. You can do some fall decor to that music. But when you hear Led Zeppelin 1, or you hear Cheap Trick in front of that crowd live at Budokan, you know
Zeppelin
they're Rick
1,
Nielsen.
Because I worked for my father's summers doing concrete finishing. So in the afternoon, I come home in the morning listening. Zeppelin 1 was on my turntable for like at least 2 months. And I just digested and I absorbed these records. Of course, Jose was Canadian, so Rush was a big thing to him. And he got me into Rush. A little known fact about me, I've seen Rush live more than any band. I think I've only seen Extreme live 3 times. So, and so Jose was my influence in this, and we just kept buying music, and I expanded what I knew. In the back of my mind was, I'm not going to be one of these pot smoking weirdos. And fact is, I didn't smoke pot till I was in my 30s anyhow, but that wasn't me. That just wasn't me. But I love the music, and I love being a part of it. So to condense this greatly, I recorded all of Jose's bands. And one day he says, "Yeah, I'm putting a new band together." And I'm like, "Yeah." He says, "Yeah, I got this Portuguese kid from Hudson." He says, "He's really hot, man. This guy is going to be amazing." He's like 16 years old. And there's Nuno. At this point, I had a studio. I quit college to open a studio. I told my parents that I was going to college to work in broadcasting. I had a degree. I had a technical whatever they teach you in technical school, and I built a studio and I started recording people like Jose for free. That's why I couldn't make any money at it, but he introduced me to Nuno. We recorded the first Sinful was the name of the band, the first demo there. And then from there, I got rid of the studio, went to work at a 24 track. At this point, I wasn't going to be assisting because I was already engineering. I just jumped right on it. The stuff, fortunately for me, it's always come naturally. So we started recording. That is how I met Jose. It goes back, how I met Nuno, and that's how it goes back to, sitting next to a kid in American government, actually, for once just speaking up and saying, "Hey, I'm a recording engineer." So that is actually where I got my start. And I recorded Nuno and Sinful, of course, and then he went from Sinful to Extreme. Oops, there's my cat.
Oh, hello.
Hello, kitty cat. I love
We've got
that.
a great cameo appearance from the studio.
Tune into the YouTube, guys, so you can see Bob's awesome board, his 3 Grammys, and his cat.
And his cat's butt right in the screen there.
Yeah, it's going to be in my face in about a second. Extreme, Nuno had convinced the guys in the band that was formerly known as The Dream
Right.
that they could have one guitar player. Gary was very reticent about that at first. It's like, I don't know. He liked the idea of the 2 guitar players on stage, that Aerosmith thing going on. And Nuno convinced him that they needed just one guitar player, because honestly, with Nuno, you need only one guitar player anyhow.
Yeah.
And he convinced them, and we recorded 3 songs up at the studio I worked at, which was called MCM. We did White People Can't Dance and Americocaine. Those are the 3 songs that we did on that first session. We had a great time, and then from there, we started working in other studios and recording demos. I think I recorded about 40 or 50 songs with them before they got their deal.
It's funny, just real quick before you go on, when we talked to Paul Geary, he talked about that, how they had written 100 songs and demoed all these songs and recorded all these things before they found the songs that they really felt represented the band.
Right.
So that's cool to hear from the other perspective like that.
And I'm pretty sure that Nuno told us that, they had a guitar player who was a jerk to him in a previous life anyway. So he had a chip on his shoulder, and then he came in and he auditioned with the other guy. And then afterwards, that dude went back to Extreme and said, "It's either him or me." And then Nuno joined the band because nobody could be in a band with Nuno. You can't play guitar on the same stage as that dude. That's terrifying.
He is a force for sure.
There's no point.
Joe Pescia, who's played in Drama Gods and all these other things, he plays with Gary. And Joe, to me, is the hardest working guy in show business. Joe can play with Nuno, but you have to be able to defer to Nuno. And yeah, he's a formidable musician, and he has very exacting ideas of what he wants. He's not as difficult as he seems. I can say that. He has his moments, and because I've spent so much time with him, we've been through a lot. I mean,
oh, we insulted him. Yeah. So Cory and I went through one of those moments for at least 6 months straight. I feel like I should tell you this story for your empathy alone, because you'll appreciate this as an engineer. So we asked. So for like 5 years with Lost Symphony, I'd been asking Paul Geary, because he's a friend of mine, and so are all the Extreme guys, except really Nuno. I didn't really know him. It's not that he wasn't my friend. I just didn't know him, and he's my hero. So I always used to say to Paul Geary, do you think that Nuno would want to play on our instrumental, orchestral song? He's like, I don't think so, bud. And I'd be like, but
I would have said the same thing. So
yeah, but please, can you ask Nuno to play on our song? Oh, I can ask him. And then he wrote back, no. And then I think I asked again and said, can we pay you? And then he wrote something to the extent of, but why would you want to work with me? I don't even like your stuff. And I was like, because I love you. And finally, we beat him down. Like, we whittled him down. I think we had a picture of his dog painted for him or something. I'd sent it to his house. I went way above and beyond. And he's like, fine, I'll play your song.
It was a process. Yeah.
And then on my birthday, I get a track from Nuno, and he fires off like 3 in a row within, like, you could tell he just recorded it. Here you go. Just record it. Here you go. And I'm with Siobhán, and she looks at me, and we had written this beautiful song with piano and tons of violins. It was really open, and just the tone, because he had like delay on distortion, whatever, was like no bueno. And Siobhán had never heard Nuno, and she was like, is this the guy you're talking about? And I was like ready to cry, because I'm like, oh my God. So Cory and I wrote back, and we're like, hey, do you have a DI of what you just sent us? It seems like, and I made the mistake of saying, the tone might be a little flat, or like something like that.
This
and
is
I can tell you right now, this wasn't going to turn out good for you.
Oh boy! Oh yeah! No, listen. I get this now. If I had seen the train coming, and he just went off, he was like, what do you mean my tone? And really what it was is that he had used delay on distortion on a very beautiful track. So the trail had distortion on it. And he said, you can't touch anything I do. So it was inappropriate as far as within the mix. There was no way it was going to work. And so I had said, can we use something different? Flipped out, wrote me like a 5-page long message on all beautiful. It was like just the syntax on it. He's like, Yngwie doesn't mind my flat tone. He's in the next room. Steve Vai came up to me and actually said he liked my tone last night. Like this whole huge thing.
This did not go well.
No God-fearing musician who has his own tone or identity leaves it to the engineer he doesn't even know. How do you think I got my sound? Even mentioned you. You think Bob St. John or Michael Wagner showed me how to get my sound? Like, oh, it was long. So finally, in this giant diatribe, he says, not everybody can play with like something like the Reckless Abandon of Marty Friedman. I said, oh, I got him. Because we know Marty Friedman. And I said, why don't I just have him play on a song with Marty? So he gets all angry. I let him cool down. Would you like to play on a song with Marty Friedman? Fine. Then when I start telling him, well, I thought you said you liked Marty Friedman. I don't really know any of his songs. You don't know Marty Friedman's song? He came out the exact same. I haven't listened to anybody past Yngwie. He came out concurrent to Yngwie with Jason Becker. Yeah, I don't know who that is, but I'll play with him. And then Marty Friedman had the audacity to be like, oh, the More Than Words guy, when they're two of the greatest guitar players in the entire world. So I finally get all those guys to play together, and I can't even tell you how crazy it was, but when Nuno finally sent me this solo for this song, it was the greatest thing I had ever heard. It's for a tribute for my friend. I cried immediately. So everything I had said that I had hated about the last one, he just fixed it. It was so much better. And by the way, I told him to get a Kemper. He said he would never get a Kemper. Then I see him playing Barracuda with like Taylor Hawkins with a Kemper right on his desk. And the tracks he sent me were beautiful sounding, like they came from a Kemper. But either way, he played the greatest solo ever. And I called Nuno and I say, thank you so much, as I'm crying. And he goes, am I fired? And I'm like, can I pay? No, you're not. That was the greatest thing ever. He goes, cool, man. I'm like, can I pay you for this? He goes, no, I don't want your money. And I'm like, I couldn't hate him more, because the whole thing, he put me through hell and back, and he's like, I can't even take your money for this. I'm just happy you smiled. And it's the greatest solo I've ever heard.
Take
so
another
I had to
piece.
share that with you.
Take another piece by Lost Symphony.
Before this, yes, it's amazing. Sounds like no.
My heart's elevated just telling that story because I love him so much, but at the same time, he put me through hell.
He can be a serious dick. Because I've known him for so long, and I'm privileged to be part of that whole small inner circle.
Yeah.
Most of us can get away with it, and we'll get into an argument. Nuno and I don't fight with anybody. I'm a very agreeable guy, but Nuno and I could get into it, especially towards the end of doing these Extreme albums. I think by the time we did, Extreme 4, he just aggravated me most of the time. And then, after Schizophrenic, I'm like, I don't think I can work with this guy anymore because it just, he doesn't make sense. And, we went back and forth on so much stuff. And, so I don't think, I did track Sadaj. I did that, but I didn't record anymore. But Nuno did the rest of it at home. I had come up with this ingenious 3-dimensional drawing of how to set up the amp because, we were at NRG recording basic tracks and we were only going to be there for, originally we're supposed to be like a week, but we were there for 22 days recording drums and bass. This happens with Extreme. Don't worry about that budget. That's no big deal. And, I moved the whole setup to his house when he lived in Santa Monica, and he had a little space in the back. I says, listen, I'm going to put the cab and the microphones out here. And then I had my drawing. It was an ingenious drawing too, by the way, that point, I was able to plot out distance from the floor to the grill and the mic, distance from this. I used, you ever see these things you use when making angles in construction?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
To measure the angle was all written down.
Can I have a copy of that, please?
So there's one problem. There's just one problem. I set it up in his house. Nuno half believing that, maybe we can pull this because he wanted to be able to use some of the live tracks he cut at the studio with the tracks that he had cut and that he was going to recut at his place. I had to leave like that night. So I got everything set up and I said, now listen to me. Don't go in that shed. Don't look at it. Lock the door. Yeah, there's a lawnmower in there. Says, don't mow your lawn. Just leave everything right where it is, okay? Can you follow that instruction? Yeah, I guess so. So,
oh boy.
So he came in, he played guitar. Even though, we were recording on a Neve and I had a couple of universal mic preamps and we rented a 67 and an 87, exactly what I was using at the studio. And I halfway didn't believe this would work. So then, I says, come over here, let's try this out. So, everything was set the same. We had that amp. I think we were using the Randall then, if I remember right. And we put that into the control room area, put it on, and I matched the gain. And he's like, dude, you're a genius. I says, listen to me. Be a genius like me. Don't touch it, okay? Yeah, no problem. And he was so happy because now he could you could use his live tracks. I knew he was never going to use his live tracks. That's Nuno. But, I left the diagram. I didn't take a picture of it. I don't know why I didn't, but I left it there. I taped it to the preamp. I said, if anything gets moved, this is where it is. And if it gets moved, call me and I'll take care of it for you. Okay. Yeah. Right. So, he doesn't do anything with it for like 6 weeks. And I get a phone call. He's like, hey, what's I going to say? When he says, what was I going to say? Now, when he says that to me, I just say, what do you want? Because he doesn't just call you up to have a chit chat. I mean, during the pandemic, he called me, a lot. I talked to him a bunch of times, more than I had in the past 10 years. He's like, yeah, what was I going to say? I says, what did you do? Yeah, well, I think I might have moved something. I said, moved something? I told you not to go in there. He says, yeah, well, I don't know. I was moving a shovel or something. It's like, $7,000 worth of microphones in a tool shed. So I said, but I'm like, that's no problem. You've got the diagram. I says, do you know the diagram? I says, it's sitting on top of the UAD preamp. Yeah. Oh, that. I says, yeah, it's a piece of paper. It's got a bunch of drawings on it. And in a rarity for me, I actually wrote legibly. And he says, oh, yeah, you know what? I think I was chewing some gum and I thought that was just a piece of napkin. So I just wrapped it up and threw it out. I said,
oh, no.
I said, oh. Remember that scene from Ferris Bueller's Day? From Planes, Trains, and Automobiles when Steve Martin, can't get a rental car and he goes back without his agreement. And the woman said, "Oh, you're fucked." That's what I said. Well, can you come out here and set it up? I said, "You want me to get on a plane, fly out there, move a couple microphones, and go home?" Yeah, I guess that is kind of crazy. I says, "Yeah, it's super crazy." He pulled it off. But he can be very mercurial. That's the best way to describe it. You learn to deal with it. When we were doing Sadaj, we were sitting in the studio, and I've known him for so long, know him through his various moods. And he's a super creative guy. He can be moody. Some days he's having good days. Some days he isn't. We're sitting there at NRG, and we were like 2 weeks into tracking. And when he would get upset, his hair gets like really greasy and stringy. And I knew this from when we were doing all those records together. Scream 3 was the first time I really noticed it. So we're sitting there, and he's like this. He's like, I'm like, you okay? He says, I just had this flashback. I mean, suddenly we're at New River recording Extreme 3, and the drums aren't right. And I said, listen, you want to stop for the night? He says, I don't know. He says, I got this impulse. Like, I just wanted to run out the door and run out into the Hollywood Hills and not come back.
Wow.
I talked him down from that, and he continued working. It's the job.
That's one thing we hear quite often is if you're an engineer or producer, you're also kind of a therapist.
When I teach young uns how to do this, I tell them that knowing how to operate this crap, that is like being a taxi cab driver. You need to know where the brake and the accelerator and steering wheel are. But when it comes to dealing with musicians, that's a special skill. That's what engineers get hired for, specific engineers, because they're comfortable with you being there. I mean, as time went by, working with Nuno, over time, I became less and less involved, but he wanted me there. When we were doing Sadaj, he recorded a lot of the bass, not the bass, but a lot of stuff himself. And I would just be sitting in the back of the room. And he'd go, "Hey, Bob, what do you think?" And I'm always listening. I'm listening even when I'm not listening. And, I'd say, go back 4 bars. There's something wrong there. He's like, oh, yeah, right. But eventually, when he got Pro Tools, I was so happy because he has very exacting ideas of what he wants. This way he could do all of that by himself. The problem is it takes him forever to do it. When we'd be recording solos, I remember we were doing on Extreme 3, he'd play through a solo and he'd be muttering like insulting things to himself under his breath.
Oh, I know that.
You're right, he says, and he just go, let's do it again. It was working in analog is a very stressful job with a guy like that. You're required, especially recording solos, which he has a basic framework he works with, but you're punching in parts over and over again. And you're talking about analog, no undo, and doing the same things 70 or 80 times in a row. I'm only human. But, as time went by, he called me a racerhead because I kept nipping off pieces of solos. That name stuck. I'm sorry, I got way off topic.
Well, no, it's all on topic. It's
just
all
to
great.
reference back, when I talked to Amit Sharma, who's a great writer at Guitar World magazine, the first thing he asked me in his English accent, how did you get Nuno to play with such chromaticism? And I first off said, I don't know what that means. And then secondly, anger. Anger did. And you've just affirmed it because I truly believe, well, first off, my skill as an engineer is I've been told I bring out the full range of emotions with anybody. So my frustratingness, I out Nuno'd Nuno. So I basically convinced him to doing a solo which is one of the greatest solos because he went in there like, fuck this guy. How do I fuck him by doing the greatest solo ever? So I could tell him I want to quit. And it was the greatest thing ever. So you've just affirmed for me that all amazing, especially guitarists that are of that level, are psychos in some way. There's something wrong with them. Like every single one of them. It's like
a lot of psychos.
Every one of them. It's like you trade something with your sanity to be able to play so well that you literally hate yourself as you're playing He-Man Woman Hater.
I mean, the ultimate Extreme disc to me, as Extreme existed in the purest form that, when they were first signed, would be Extreme 2. Extreme 2 was mostly recorded in Boston. We didn't record a lot of it in LA. I got some crap from Wagner when I mentioned this in the 25th anniversary DVD, well, because the person the producer had it edited together in a really rude way for both of us. And he saw it, and then I saw it, and then I said, I called the producers, you can't put these two quotes together. They're like juxtaposed in such a way, like we were saying different things. Wagner's always said, hey, this record was mostly done when it was brought to me. Because Paul Geary had this red light syndrome when he was recording, Nuno, Gary, Pat, and I knew these were going to be the tracks for the album, but we didn't tell Paul because Paul gets something in his head about it. And those are his best performances, is on Extreme 2. And Paul's a great drummer. Paul and Nuno are always like this, but, he played the shit out of Extreme 2. And to me, that captures the band, the essence of them. That was at their peak. A lot of people think Extreme is more than words, but they're not more than words. They're all of that and then some. It's weird, and people look back and they're like, what was your first big hit? That was the first Grammy nomination was More Than Words. And of course, it was number one in 14 countries. It was a big deal. And people say, as an engineer, I engineered and mixed a song that has 3 instruments in it. Woo! I was hot. So, very few people know. You have to really be paying attention to the credits to know that there's actually 3 mixes of More Than Words. There's the one that's on the album, which you rarely hear because it's so long. There's the version I did, which is 3:40 or so, that we went to Cortland Studio, which is where we had done all of their demos and recorded Extreme 1 and 2. And when they knew it was going to be a single, we recut some of the stuff. We edited the song for certain, and it was classic analog editing. We transferred the digital into 2-inch and did the editing and fixed a few things there. And that was one version. And then there's another version that I know the band hates that has the finger cymbal and shaker in it that Brian Malouf mixed. And that stuff wasn't approved by the band. Nuno came out of his skin when he heard that, because that was never his intention for the song. But, leave it to a record label to say we need, 7 mixes of a song with 3 instruments. By all means. That's part of, where Nuno comes from with this stuff, and it's why I've always understood him, is that when we did Extreme 2, the record label wouldn't allow us to produce the band. And, I use the term produce loosely because I feel most engineers are producers. Am I a producer in the purest sense of the word? No. But am I a producer in the sense of the word we use it now? Yes. Help define the performances. When they were doing Extreme 2, Nuno, of course, had a couple of songs that he had done himself, which was Wholehearted, which he had, recorded. That's a demo actually done on an 8-track. Gary was holding a lavalier mic to sing that vocal, by the way.
Wow.
Not kidding. Yeah. And also the When I First Kissed You. So those things were solely Nuno, and he had producer credit on them. When the record was done, he, wanted producer credit. And the time to ask for credit is not when you finish the record, it's before you do it. And I think that shaped him in a lot of ways. He was always concerned about somebody getting credit for something that he did. And that's part of what I've noticed with him when it comes to stuff like that weird crap with we're talking about when you're having him play guitar. For one thing, persistence works with him. You just got to be ready to take whatever's going with it. Like, I've had him play in a couple of things, but I'll have a client sometimes will say, can get Nuno to play in this, and I'll force them to go through the proper path. Because if I call Nuno and say, I want you to play in this, he'll just play on it. But I don't call favors in from him unless I absolutely feel he's the person for the job, Otherwise, so, however you pulled that off, Benny, that's a miracle. I'm just telling you.
Benny pulls a lot of miracles in terms of coaxing
that
people into
that's
projects.
Next level.
Hold on, here's the 3rd level miracle of that. So if you listen to Take Another Piece, Nuno and Marty Friedman both said, don't play over me. But specifically, Marty said, you can do whatever you want, but don't harmonize me. I've done all the harmony that needs to be done. Nuno, first off, said, fuck that. Because he's like, and I think his words exactly to me was like, I'm a boy from Boston and you're going to tell me not to hammer home the Boston harmonies. So he does harmonies. So I said, fuck it. Called Alex Skolnick from Testament and said, hey, could you take these harmonies home and make them like Queen? He's like, sure, because he's the agreeable one of those 3 maniacs.
Right.
And he's like, oh, they know each other. We've all gotten lunch together. So he was like, where Nuno and Marty acted like they've never met each other. They don't know of each other. Alex is like, oh, yeah, we all hung out in Japan 16 times. But if you listen to the middle of that, it's Alex Skolnick, Marty Friedman, and Nuno Bettencourt all playing together these beautiful harmonies that you would have thought that they worked out together, but no.
When I heard it, I thought they worked it
mirrors.
out. I thought that was very clever, actually.
Yeah, no, it was really just because they all didn't listen to me. And I didn't listen to Marty Friedman, so I just said, you know what, Nuno, I agree with you. And then I said, Alex Koldick, let's just make this the best we could.
Once it leaves his studio, it's yours. What else is there to say? People send me stuff all the time. I change the notes if I don't like them. I got to sit there and mix it. I'm not going to listen to you suck for 2 days.
I appreciate that.
That's amazing. All right, so I would be remiss if I didn't dig a little deeper into this, just because Porno Graffiti is one of my favorite records of all time. Like sonically, I think it shaped my direction as an engineer alone, but also just obviously Nuno and the performances and everything. Can you talk a little bit more about how you guys achieved that sound? Because you are working with it sounds very open and sparse, but still so big. Like, so what was the approach to like creating that sound?
I mean, you probably already can guess that, Nuno playing through a Gorilla amp sounds like Nuno. Nuno playing through a direct box plugged into the console sounds like Nuno. That sound is a part of it. I mean, I recorded him on that song. I recorded that song they did with Steven Tyler, the Brown Sugar. And Nuno playing through Johnny Depp's really awful cigar box guitar still sounds like Nuno. It doesn't matter. And, I walk by, the action on the guitar is like this high. I'm like, what have you got there? I'm looking at him. He's like, I can't play this thing, but I promised, it was like a condition that Johnny wanted to be there at the sessions. And Nuno says, we can't have him here. We're not going to get anything done. And so because all those guys were friends, Steven Tyler and Joe Perry. So the compromise was Nuno would play Johnny Depp's guitar and amp. It was one of those, you ever see those amps? They look like they're made out of boxes or something. It's become, all very boutiquey. And, but even him playing that weird guitar sounded like Nuno. When we were doing, when we were first recording, we were always chasing a sound. Nuno loved Warren DeMartini, and we loved Rat because that was the thing at the time. And if you go back and listen to Extreme 1, that tone is very similar to Rat. Extreme 2, and I keep trying to, I have a cassette that has the rough mixes we did before we went to LA of Extreme 2. When we got there, Wagner had that setup that he had used with Skid Row, where he had the ADA preamp and a Macintosh power amp. And he had this one cab that was I believe, slant Marshall cab with 20 watt Celestians in it. And Wagner set this up. He says, try this mic. It was a Fostex printed ribbon mic, a weird looking square mic. And honestly, it's like a lot of ribbon mics. Put it anywhere and it sounds good. We put that right there, almost against the grill. Came back in, used the John Hardy mic preamp and a Yuri 10-band graphic EQ that he kind of notched out a little bit of the mid-range. And then I'm not sure, because he used these BBE sonic maximizer processor things a lot. I can't remember where that was in the chain. On Gear Sluts, there was a post that somebody had asked, and I went into detail, and Wagner got involved. And between the two of us, I think we were able to remember it. It wasn't my setup. And then, from there, the thing with Nuno, he doesn't have a lot of patience for fooling around with guitar tones, and by the time we did Extreme 3, it was like we picked out an amp, just listening to them, whichever one. That was the Saldano on Extreme 3. And we tried everything. We tried different amps, different cabs. Then it's like put a mic in front of it. And, still my basic miking then, I think I used 87s. I used maybe 1 or 2 87s on the cab, and that was it. And with Nuno, it's, he's playing guitar. He's tuning guitar. He starts jamming something. You've got 10 minutes. You better make good use of it, because at the end of 10 minutes, we're going to record, and unless there's something really screwed up with the sound, that's what we've got. So for me, that taught me how to do that quickly. None of this, we're going to spend 3 hours and then we're going to go get Starbucks and see what it sounds like, because your ears are very elastic. And what they will do invariably is, even when you're trying to get a different sound, you'll start going towards the last sound that you had, which you already didn't like, So that was the creative process with him. You had to do it fast. He had something in his mind. Even when we did the Extreme 2, we didn't spend a lot of time fooling around with that. That preamp sounded great with him. And, somewhere during the album, towards the end. I think when we got to Little Jack Horny, the thing broke. The transformer went on it, and Wagner had it sent to 88 to fix. And he says, don't touch anything, just change the transformer. But when it came back, it just never sounded the same. We knew right away. Wagner said it, I said it, and it was just like, I don't know what happened. There was something magical going on there. I don't know if a tube died. But the sound is him. Of course, you got to remember, and I don't think he was using the rat pedal with that. I don't think, but I didn't keep notes back then. From Extreme 3 on, I can tell you everything down to whatever setting was on which amp and which song. But from that was basically classic rock and roll. Like that record was recorded. We spent probably 8 or 9 days at Cortland recording it, and then probably 3 weeks in LA recording it. And that was it. We were done. Yeah. Like we used to do records, not think about it so much.
That's amazing, though, to hear that, because you're right. I mean, it was interesting that you said, your ear will tend to go back to the last thing and then you don't really like it anymore. Yeah. And is that something that you think arose with the digital age of you can just tinker forever and, you don't really have to commit as early to a sound or...
The not committing thing is a real massive problem because it allows you to not get it right in the first place and say, oh, we'll fix this later. And that's not the way we should be doing this. When I record, I get the sounds I want and not think like, well, someday that snare is going to sound good. Because, the key to making really good sounding recordings is recording what you actually want to hear and not worrying about it later. So what's happened with the digital age is people become less serious about getting the right sounds. Then it becomes something, like you only see when you're watching Mix with the Masters. But, when you've got a guy who's like, been engineering for 30 years and he's got his Neve console and his, $400,000 collection of microphones, that's unrealistic for the rest of the people because it's like, well, heck, I just bought a Warm Audio 47 and I'm going to use it with this, Behringer preamp. How come I can't get that sound? And I say, well, it's got nothing to do with your gear. It's got everything to do with your ears and what you're doing with the gear. And if you don't get the sound from the equipment in the first place, how can you possibly record it? The problem with digital is it allows us to make adjustments later. And listen, I take advantage of it. I record directs off of guitar players all the time. In the event I screwed up, or in the event something went wrong, or maybe I just don't like the sound, or I want to be able to combine a more saturated sound with it. I mean, you've got the technology. There's no reason to not use it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Just sorry, where you're at there. I just want to point out, talking about getting it right at the source. I know for me, as I was like teaching myself to mix and do production, all that stuff, and then I would subscribe to things like Mix with the Masters and watch all these videos of really high-end engineers doing a mix where they have one EQ plugin on a couple channels and they're making these like small moves and then the mix sounds immaculate. And I'm like, dude, I have 30 plugins trying to get rid of the garbage, noise in the back. I'm like, how are these people doing it? I'm like, oh, because the actual source tracking material and arrangement is beautiful.
If you just spend time getting the sound, that's actually part of the battle. That means standing next to your amp. Is this the sound you want? Because if that's not the sound you want, why am I recording it? I can't make it be something that it isn't. And, the final point to that is people actually need to use the technology and not let the technology use them. And what's happened is there's so much available that you start getting all wrapped up in, well, what kind of really, fly thing can I do with this plugin when just record it right in the first place? That's what sounds the hugest is when you just get the sound in the first place.
It's so important that you say that because one of the first things I was told is if you record it the way you want it to tape, mixing it is just leveling. And that's it, and then it's going to sound pretty much what it is versus like, oh, I have this vision, but it's nothing like that. If you're just making sure it sounds good to tape. And one thing that it's also not limiting yourself because, I came from an interesting time where my first recording was at Longview Farm Studios where we used analog and we had a Neve board. Yeah. RIP. They don't exist. Yeah. And going and spending $1,500 a day and doing all this stuff. And then, I got a Digio 2 DigiDesign little board with automation, 8 little thing. And I remember doing recordings on that and sending that to one of my mixing guys. And he said he couldn't believe it was made on a DAW like that. And I said, that's because technology is no longer limiting us. And, because I remember when I listened to a 4-track and it didn't sound right. But like once you got to digital, it's one of those things where it's like, it's in your hands now. So it seems like it's a liberating thing in the sense that, oh, now, instead of having $1 million buy-in, you have to have a Neve, you have to have all this stuff. You can just have an Apple computer and a microphone, but whether it sounds good or not, just like before, is up to you. And the one thing that you have to bring that I want to mention is, so I've seen all these different articles, the Gear Sluts thing example, of this is how Nuno sounded. And I know people that love Nuno and they want to get all these pieces of equipment. And what I always remind people is, but the X factor is Nuno's hand. Just like the X factor is, like, if I give you a bunch of SM57s and an 8-channel board, you'll probably make something rad. Whereas you have all these, rap producers sitting in their basement, with all this amazing gear, and they're stifled by plugins and they can't even commit to a take.
Yeah. And committing is important. I mean, when I'm producing stuff to this day, I make composites of everything. I seriously don't want to look down at this console and see 60 tracks of background vocals or keyboards or crazy layers of crap that I don't want to think about it. When we were cutting Extreme 4, I remember I was on the phone. I was actually living in Boston then. And, Nuno called me up and said, listen, I got an idea for this. And he says, this is going to be more raw than Extreme 3. We're going for a more stripped down approach. And he talked about it because I knew we were going to Criteria to do it, where they had that beautiful Neve 8068 and the big room. And I said, why don't we actually just keep the drums on 3 tracks where we can't change the balance? He's like, well, I don't know. I says, no. We're going to record the drums also, but I'm going to make a mix of the drums and we're going to use those for all of the tracking. Because, part of the thing, the records we grow up with, I mean, Bonham didn't want anybody to even put mics near his kit. There was no direct mics. There was no mics on the toms or any crazy crap like that. I said, is that we all perform to the mix that you've got. So the problem is if I'm always diddling around with the mix while people are tracking, or I change it when we're cutting vocals, it changes how you feel the groove. And he's like, that's an interesting thought. And still in the back of my mind, I had no idea if I was even going to be able to pull this crap off. But when we were there, I made a mix of the drums. On the Neve has a monitor section. We call it the jukebox. It's basically just 24 little faders. And this had 4 outputs. It was a quad board. So I used the rear outputs to route the drums through a compressor, and I recorded kick separate and then just the mix of the drums. And that's actually the sound of Extreme 4. And we pulled it off. I know a lot of fans, their favorite record because it's so shocking after hearing Extreme 3. But I'm very proud of that for it's organic and raw. But the songs are probably not as good as Extreme 3, but it's a fun record to listen to. I heard it for the first time in a long time, about 2 or 3 months ago. I'm like, this isn't so bad. It's because it was a failure from a sales standpoint in this country. People tend to look at it as a serious also ran. But the thing is, that thing sold 800,000 units in Europe, where people actually appreciate music like that. Here, 100,000 units is an abysmal failure. So.
That's an amazing statement as far as figures concerned, because nowadays with first off, albums aren't a thing. It's just streaming, and now you're getting these aggregates of like. Here's the Spotify, here's this. And if you could sell 30 or even 60,000 units,
no kidding.
You're killing it. You're killing it. A band like Iron Maiden will sell 60,000 units and be number 1 in like 25 countries. Whereas if you're in 1993 and you're an Ugly Kid Joe and you only did 100,000, they're like, we can't do another record with you. Could you imagine?
That's it. We're done. We're done.
100,000? How many more does my mom have to buy before I can finally get that Ferrari where it's like now 100,000? What are you in John Mayer's? Are you John Mayer? Like, it's crazy.
So the thing is that and the story I was going to tell you regarding, how adults record, that's what I call adults.
Adults recording.
The people who invented recording, Bill Schnee, Al Schmidt, Bob Clearmountain, I got some tracks. I work with a lot of Christian artists in Spanish. And there's a very well-known artist named Marcos Vidal. He gets everybody to play in his records. And he doesn't have huge budgets. But like I knew his manager really well. He says, listen, I need you to make a instrumental track for Marcos. He's got to do this at some show. He says, they're going to send you the files on DVD. And he says, all right. I knew Bill Schnee recorded this and probably produced it. So I get like the session, and it's on like 4 DVDs. I open it up, and it's like, seriously, it's 80 tracks of music, recorded analog, you know? And I'm like, I said, Nelson, this is going to take some time. No, it won't take any time at all. I'm telling you, just turn up the faders. I'm like, well, that's impossible, you know? So, and I'm turning up the tracks, and I am hearing the most impeccable, amazing recording ever. This shit will humble you. You know, you think you know how to record. No, you don't. Bill Schnee knows how to record. Give me a break, you know? And I'm looking at him like, holy crap. And I just started putting the faders up. I'm like, you've got to be kidding. And I had a copy of the record. And what I did was I just kept switching back and forth till I had the balance right. I didn't use a single EQ. I used a couple reverbs just because it needed reverb. And they were all live instrument, live horns, live strings, real piano, real percussion, background vocals, all condensed to sets, groupings of tracks. I'm like, oh, this is how adults do this.
Yeah.
You know? And that, to me, still to this day, I saved those files just so I can put them on and listen to them sometime, because it's like, you got to be kidding. This is how this is done. The thing is that people have kind of lost their way in that, because really, you haven't got as many young guys assisting the older guys like that, and who are classics, who, like I said, invented recording. And so they're losing a feel for what it actually needs to sound like. You know, you record on a Neve. Like, did you record at Longview when they had the Neve, Benny?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, that fucking console. Here's a funny story about that console. That console came from 301 Studios in Sydney. That's where we mixed Schizophonic, on that console when it was in Sydney.
No.
Wow.
That's wild.
How they get something that big? Plus EMI is 301's like on the 5th floor. And of course, you see where it was in the barn at Longview. Now, I recorded, well, I know that Nuno did Susie's Telelove record on that. And I think I worked with Jonathan Mover in this band with Einstein. It was with Jane Mangini. And we did that at Longview. I'm not sure if we did that on the Neve or the SSL when we were there. But once you record on a Neve, there's actually nothing else to say. And I tell people this, I said, plug a mic in, put the mic in the right place, record it. That's all you need to know. This is not golden ear shit. I mean, you know, as engineer, you need to know which mic to pick, which one complements the sound. But from there, I don't think anything actually gets better than a Neve. And I'm not speaking of like just a module that's been disemboweled from the console. I'm speaking the whole thing, you know. That makes my life easy. I just give me some good musicians and we're there. You know?
Right.
That's incredible. Listen, we've already blown through our first episode here.
You killed it.
Wrap it up. This is amazing.
This is amazing. This brings up so many questions I have for part 2. So
okay.
Yeah. Bob, is there anything you want to let people know about where they can, you know, find more about you, or, you know, get in touch with you? I know you're on Sound Better, I think, right?
Yep, I'm on Sound Better. You can also find me on Facebook under Bob St. John Recording Engineer.
Sound Better, just for everyone, it's a place where you can go online and hire Bob to make your music sound amazing.
And also my website, which is being updated. But those are the best places to find me.
Very cool. Well, we're looking forward to diving a bit deeper in part 2. Guys, check out 2020-d.com, and we'll see you next week.
You know, because even as a local band, we took ourselves very seriously. So, like, you know, in the arenas back then, they used to have these platforms and stuff on stage, these metal, like, we would build them out of wood. And put them in trucks and show up at the clubs and actually have like platforms and risers that we just did it ourselves, because to us, we were just like, we were an arena band playing clubs and we wanted to present ourselves that way. So that's what we did.